Welcome to the CHRO South Africa webinar, where we'll be discussing the effective use of video recruitment tools without hampering the quality of your appointees. My name is Sungula Nkabinde, and I'm the Community Manager at CHRO South Africa. Now, as you arrive into the room, please make sure to introduce yourself and make sure to click at panelists and attendees. There's a little box in the chat box that says address to panelists, and there's a drop-down menu that says to panelists and attendees. The reason why that's important is so that everybody in the chat can see your questions and comments. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce this topic, which is really about the fact that, over the last 30 years, companies have updated, upgraded, and overhauled every aspect of their business, replacing inefficiencies and ineptitude with technology and intelligence. That said, so many organizations are still recruiting people like they're still living in the third industrial revolution. Why are global technology trends such as one-way video technology not yet mainstream in South Africa like they are in the rest of the world? And that's what we'll be discussing today with our guest, Francois De Wet, who is a renegade industrial psychologist and founder of South Africa's biggest video interview software company called Wamley. Francois has built a company bridging the gap between these global technology trends and understanding the unique challenges of the South African market. He's a registered industrial psychologist with a passion to provide clients with insightful information about their talent. And by combining his qualifications and experience as a business psychologist with his knowledge and understanding of a variety of commercial and industrial environments, Francois has successfully managed large-scale business transformation projects, enabling organizational effectiveness. Lastly, Francois is known and respected among decision makers within major local and industrial corporations for providing insights using people data to achieve outstanding results. He was the regional chair of SIOPSA and a keynote speaker at conferences and other events. Now, I think that's a good enough intro to give you a sense of the caliber of person that's going to be talking to you today. Francois, welcome. Thank you for spending this time with us. I think you've got a great presentation prepared for our audience today, so I'm going to let you get into that. I'd like to, before I hand over to you, I'd like to ask everybody in attendance to please drop your comments and questions in the chat, again, addressing them to panelists and attendees, so that we can have a really engaging Q&A section towards the end of today's webinar. It's very important that whatever you think, whether it's positive or negative feedback or a question, that you drop it in the chat. All right, Francois, over to you.
Awesome. Let me just share my slides. Singula, can you see the slides?
We're rocking.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome everybody in the audience and everybody streaming into the session. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend the webinar and to listen to me today. Thank you so much, Singula, for that lovely introduction, and everybody at CHRO for letting us talk to the community this morning. I really hope to make it worth your while, and if not, hit me up. I'll buy you a coffee. As mentioned, the title of today's discussion is Re-engineering Recruiting. And as per Singula's introduction, the idea really is to talk about how do you find people without losing your mind. And I wish if we were a live audience, I could ask by the raise of a hand, how many of you have felt that way when being in a recruitment process? The idea of today's discussion really is to stimulate some thoughts. And so not everything I will be talking to today is relevant for everybody, and I completely understand that. So some organizations are doing exactly and potentially more than what I would be talking to today. But I really do hope that I stimulate some thoughts, and I'm really looking forward to having a great interactive Q&A session at the back end of the presentation. And so the structure of the talk I will start the conversation around the title and then move into some techniques to re-engineer some of the challenges that I will be highlighting in the introduction and in the first section. And then at the back end, have a great Q&A session with all of you. My business partner, Marnus Broodryk, is also in the audience. Good morning, Marnus. It's great to have you here as well. So if there are very specific questions regarding Wamley, Marnus will be very glad to answer that as we go. But please do bear in mind that the talk will be about 30 to 40 minutes to leave enough time, about 20 minutes for us to have the Q&A session. So without any further ado, let's get cracking. So people power organizations and HR powers people. And so I believe we can't ignore the importance of people to organizations, which makes HR possibly, in my opinion, the most critical function in our business. You guys would know this, that people we work alongside are in a very real way our second family. They become our work family. And as such, they are responsible for the company's success, as well as our own and our happiness. And so people really are a big deal. But there's a but. In many cases and in many organizations, how we source, how we hire, and how we recruit people is so outdated as to be damaging, especially when the conveniences of modern technology can help rectify this. I see Roland raised his hand. I don't necessarily want to stop, but Singula, do you just want to check? Is there a technical error? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, no, I think he just raised his hand as a show of hands. Don't pay too much mind to that for now.
All right, perfect. Fantastic. So what I was saying, guys, how we source, recruit, and hire people is outdated, especially when the conveniences of modern technology are available for us to help rectify this. And so today I want to share what I've learned over the last few years as an insider, as an outsider, as someone who's been enmeshed within the world of HR, so that we can jumpstart and really kickstart this recruitment industry back to its rightful place at the top of the organizational hierarchy. As mentioned by Singula, my name is Francois De Wet. I'm an industrial psychologist, and I'm absolutely fascinated by human dynamics and processes. But what really excites me is how we can optimize people and the systems that manage them, the systems that manage our employees, how we manage our business from a people and a human capital perspective. I'm married to a recruiter, my wife, and she absolutely hates recruiting. And so I founded a company a couple of years ago that applies technology to the problem of recruitment to see if I can at least try and fix it. And the company is called Wamly, which uses one-way or asynchronous video interview software and a collaborative back end to help organizations hire better people faster. It's working. The ideas we bundled into Wamley are really changing things. And so I think we're onto something. And it's not just my thoughts. These are quantifiably working in practice in real businesses across our clients. But today is not about my product, but it is about all the things that we've learned while building it, dealing with clients, dealing with recruiters, dealing with other HR organizations that I know can go a long way to hiring better people faster. And even without our amazing solution, available for this week, only for a low, low price. And if you buy now, okay, I'm joking, no. I really want this talk to be about the things that you can do yourself tomorrow already to change the way you recruit. So success is a result of relevance. All businesses are constantly doing, learning, changing, adapting, evolving, reimagining the way they go about doing their business. If you don't, we all know that you become completely irrelevant. And by staying ahead is how you stay in business. So just ask Kodak, Blockbuster, Musica, some of the examples, they're just down the road on the corner with a cardboard sign and a paper cup, completely irrelevant. by not sticking with changing world of work. The fourth industrial revolution we're finding ourselves in now demands that we adapt in light with what's happening around us. And so we are constantly evolving our systems. We are constantly evolving our processes. And for the last 100 years, we've used technology to help us do that. And so if you look at my slide, I'm going to talk to 6 areas where technology has really influenced how we go about doing business. Firstly, how we talk to each other. So post became fax, fax became email, and now we can communicate in seconds, not in weeks. And we maintain total control over all of our communication. We can refer back to our communication. Millions and millions of hours of conversations now are archived and held in the cloud at our fingertips. If we think of mobile, phones went to mobile, and now we can do sales calls and stay in contact with clients and staff without having to be chained to our desks. So the evolvement of technology in how we talk to each other. Secondly, how we get together, so how we assemble. So if you think of calendars, we now have shared calendars reminding us of meetings. We can book each other, we can meet each other, and we are now working together via calendars. Sometimes death by calendar, especially in the last 2 years. We've seen one Zoom call and one team calls overlapping. The excuse of, sorry, I missed the meeting, I'm stuck in traffic, no longer really works. You just hop from the one call onto the other. Interesting side note, I heard an organization the other day that has now implemented Zoom-free Fridays to deal with on-screen fatigue. But that's just a side story, maybe something for another day. Another area where technology has really evolved the way we work is how we do our books, right? So we've gone from ledgers to books to Excel, and now we find ourselves in Xero or in Sage, cloud accounting. How we solve problems. So think of documents, the co-creation ability and possibilities of sharing documents mean we can collaborate together. I'm sure everybody in the audience has strategy sessions. And if you think of these sessions, we use technology such as MS Teams to get Exco involved, irrespective of where they are, get stakeholders into the room to solve a problem. This is true for how we work on a day-to-day basis. So in the past, we worked from cubicles. That became work from home in some instances. And now, really, thanks to COVID, it's work from anywhere. So the question to this slide is, what about recruiting? I believe the most we've evolved in this, which, back to my introduction, is an extremely important part of our business, is the way we advertise positions on the internet. But this means that there are still a lot of areas where we are recruiting like it's 1984. We waste time, we waste effort, we waste a lot of money, and we don't really get the results we're looking for. We continue to fill our organizations, not in all instances, but in many cases, with employees who aren't the fit that we're looking for from a job perspective, as well as from an organization and culture perspective. And so the question for today is why? Surely if you consider existing technology out there in the world of recruiting, someone must have done some work in this area because it's such a big problem. And the answer is yes, but I would like to add a but. You see, from an existing technology perspective, specifically focusing on recruiting, there are a number of attempts to use technology to make recruiting better. But to my slide, there are some challenges with this. Firstly, they can be really expensive. So hundreds of thousands of dollars and rands spent with lengthy implementation times in some of these HRIS and ATS systems out there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here today to bash any system. I'm merely talking to the idea of implementing technology. So they're costly, first. Secondly, we think that they are designed to work in all markets, but they're really suitable for any. So localization really matters. And especially in South Africa, we're sitting with a very unique culture. We're sitting with very unique legislation, working habits, job requirements, POPI, EE. And so context really, really is important to consider, because these all change in different regions for different organizations. And so a one-size-fits-all piece of technology is not always that relevant and useful. Also, if you consider complex versus complicated, more complicated than complex, we found that when technologies try to do too much, it can be slightly off-putting to users who simply then go back to what they know. And this is particularly true of some of the technologies out there. So more complicated than complex. And later in the conversation, I will talk to complex versus complicated. But we know that buy-in created with your stakeholders, line managers that will ultimately end up using the technology don't like to work with complicated systems. So once again, these are problems that we are trying to fix, but it's not easy, which is why today is about helping you to do things smarter in your own capacity and in your own context. So if we go over to our first poll for the day, Singula is going to draw this up for us. Let me read it out to you. I'd like the audience to respond. How long, on average, does it take to fill a vacancy in your organization? So you've got options: less than 10 hours, 10 to 20 hours, 20 to 30 hours, and 30 to 40 hours. I will give a minute for this while the audience is answering the poll. Okay, I can see a clear winner. We'll give it a bit of a go still. Okay, we're sharing the poll results. So 78% of the audience say 30 to 40 or even more, which brings me to the point. Time to hire is a real challenge. And I believe that was going to be the answer. I'm very grateful that you agree with me. And so this really becomes a challenge. And so let's dissect time to hire in the next section of the presentation. Let me just close this poll. Okay, dissecting the time to hire. So if you consider and follow me on my slide, the typical process that we follow when trying to hire and fill a vacancy. Again, as I mentioned in the introduction, I know that some organizations aren't doing exactly this, but if we typically look at the flow, there will be a call for positional opening from inside your organization. HR will post job listings on different sites such as job boards. Applicants will respond with CVs, flood the vacancy with CVs. Someone needs to sift through and check the suitability and viability of the candidates based on some sort of set of minimum criteria that you use: qualification, experience, maybe skills or knowledge. The top CVs then get chosen via HR or in combination with line managers' input, and then we schedule interviews. Interviews are conducted. Thanks to COVID, some of these interviews now happen via Teams or Zoom or a phone call. And then from there, a second round, a third round, some instances, a fourth, fifth, sixth round interview. And really what's happening is, at the end of the day, the least terrible candidate, if I can call it that, is hired. And then 2 months later, very often, the candidate does not make it in the role. And so on average, we are seeing about 40 man hours to fill a single position. And on a study conducted by Burson with Deloitte found that a total average of 52 days. So this slide just again confirming the poll that we just went through. that it really takes a long time. By the way, I showed this to a client of ours yesterday, and she responded with, no, it's at times it used to be more than 52 days. So I guess this research from Deloitte is probably on average. And again, if we were in a live presentation, I would ask by show of hand how many of the audience agrees with this 52 days to fill a vacancy. Now, let's go back to cost, because really the bottom line in ROI is what this is all about. If you consider the financial cost of an unfilled position, let's take an example. We've got a person, an employee in your organization, let's say average salary of 40,000 Rand. But the return of that position in the organization is of a value of, let's say, 120,000 Rand. So that means 80,000 Rand a month cost in not having the position filled. And that is not even considering a few other factors, such as the people and the systems who have to shoulder the slack of this position not being filled, as well as the opportunity cost that just amounts every single month for not having that person in the seat. Onboarding, the employee has got costs involved. Training from a systems perspective, from a space, technology, computer, enabling the individual, getting them into the organization. And then the worst is when they don't meet the criteria within the probation period and you need to start the whole process again. So my question is, how can something so important be so costly, one, and so soul destroying? You know, think about the average interview you've ever run. How long? How unnecessary? How you think about all the things you could have been doing in those 52 days. You know, we've got a client who told us a story. I'd like to share it with you. She keeps a fountain pen during interviews, not to look pretty or fancy, but because it's got a really sharp point so that she can press it into her leg after her 5th back-to-back hour-long interview in the same room when she dozes off to try and maintain her focus. And can you relate to that? I bet you can. So this is the part of recruitment we hate. The time it takes, and we believe there is a better way to re-engineer this process, which will take me to my second poll. What do you think is the most broken part of the recruitment process? So if you consider the previous slide and all the bubbles I had, what do you think in your environment, in your context, is the most broken part? Advertising positions, the entire process, the interviews themselves, the lack of businesses' visibility, how we grade and group candidates, and consistently poor quality candidates. Again, I'll give it a few seconds so that you can respond. Excellent. Votes coming in. We're on 80% of the audience. Okay, poll closed. Now, this is really interesting, and I was hoping that this would happen. So you can see across the options that there isn't really a clear winner. So consistently poor candidates came out, 36% of the audience believed it's that. But actually across all of these areas, we're seeing a response that the areas are all potentially broken. Which brings me back to the introduction of the conversation around there is an opportunity for us to re-engineer every one of these steps. And that is exactly what the next section of the presentation will attempt to do. So if we start with the CV. The CV, in my opinion, in our opinion, is untrustworthy. You know, people get creative to get in the door. CVs are non-dynamic, they're updated poorly, majority of the time they are out of date. And just like the saying, you can't judge a book by its cover, we believe you can't judge a recruit by their CV. How often, ladies and gentlemen, have you met an individual in the interview who does not look like their CV at all? And so CVs do not reflect candidates. And in fact, if you consider the research, they are a very bad predictor of job success. And so from a solution perspective, here are some things that you can consider when we get to the CV, which is the beginning of the process. So maybe ask people to send in only the areas in the CV that will allow you to make a very quick decision. So those minimum criteria, qualification, knowledge, experience, skills, those gross negative disqualifiers that you would use to either kick Francois out or move Francois forward in the process. The CV has never been the only element that organizations use to hire candidates. So why are we working through 20 pages of a PDF? Maybe you could stop asking for CVs entirely. So let's lose the CV. If all you need is to make sure they meet the bare minimum qualifying criteria, maybe we could use an online tool to set up more interesting qualifying criteria or questions to force a clear, concise answer. Because the problem with the CV is the candidate is in control of what they are showing you. I want us to flip that entirely around to say, you tell the candidates only what you want to hear. And so we could get away with a CV entirely. And I do know that some ATS and HRI solutions do this, but they still need people experts to help the system understand what and how to screen with. And we do not have time today to go into AI and machine learning, but there are some pieces of technology out there that can allow you to stop wasting valuable hours working through CVs on a day-to-day basis. So if we consider the next section of the previous slide, interviews, here are some thoughts. I believe face-to-face interviews could potentially be bad for you. Why do I say that? They take hours of setting up and they take hours of doing, even when you know the interviewee is wrong for the job. I mean, you can't stop within the first 5 minutes and go, thank you so much, Francois. You're not what we're looking for. Goodbye. Hashtag the weakest link. No, we can't do that. So we have to sit through that entire interview and hope the next 7 lined up in the corridor outside of the boardroom is not the same experience. Secondly, I think interviews could be bad for your brand. Every other aspect of the world is faster and more efficient, and people are used to things working and adapting and evolving and changing in a certain way. And so outdated processes become poor experiences for your candidates. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, is people are, and especially employees or potential employees, are interviewing you as much as you are interviewing them. And so do you want to lose the best candidate because he sees the interview process as a reflection of your organization's EVP? Obviously not. So some solutions in this way. Firstly, two-way video interviews. They don't require the same level of scheduling as traditional face-to-face interviews, and they can be done anywhere at better times. And I assume that most of you are doing this already. Thank you, COVID. But the question then becomes, should you keep doing it? Because it's substantially easier and there's no real downside. But this is the most basic fix, but I don't believe it's the best. You see, you could consider one-way video interview. Now, Wamley uses what we call asynchronous video. So the candidate will log into the software where a series of the questions that you set up based on the requirements of the role await them. Then they answer these like in video to the camera inside the software. Once they're done, the software will upload the video responses and you will get notified. So the raters and the HR team members will get notified, and you can then watch this and treat it like browsing your Netflix. So if a candidate catches your attention, awesome, you keep watching and listening to their answers. And if they don't and they're wrong for the role, then they are gone with a click of a button. Now, this part has saved our clients up to 80% of their interviewing time. 80%, I mean, that is massive. But there are other similar solutions out there, so don't think I'm trying to force you to take ours. But I do want you to think about this and find something that puts some distance between yourself and the interviewee, especially earlier in the process. I understand that if you end up high in the organization with the top 2 candidates, that you might want to use a higher touch experience than a higher tech experience. But ultimately, you want to be in as much control as possible. The final solution to the section around interviews can be to keep face-to-face if you think that's best, but I would suggest that you make them hyper-focused. So maybe brief your attendee prior to the interview, make the interview really focused, maybe 15 minutes, and really get to the point of what is going to predict success in the role based on the requirements of the position in relation to the candidates. And this takes me to this next section of my slides, which is the Wamley system. So a few screenshots you can see on the system here of what the portal, the asynchronous video solution, can look like, compatible on any device where you get to set up questions, invite candidates to do a one-way video interview. The system is recording the candidate's answer, notifies the rater. You will then be able to log in, make comments, create a database, build a talent pool, and save all that time that you would have spent on a face-to-face interview or a first or a second round interview, trying to navigate through all of the candidates. Okay, questions. The next part that you mentioned in poll number 2 needs some re-engineering and thinking. So I believe many questions are quite generic and lazy, and they're the same for everyone. And we all know garbage in, garbage out. And so 2 examples of questions that I believe are not great to answer during ask during an interview are, 1, questions that has got nothing to do with the role. So if you're asking questions around race, age, sexual preference, political leanings, religion, unless of course if you are recruiting for a church, then religion is probably a big deal. But these questions tell you nothing, because they've got nothing to do, the answers to the questions tell you nothing because they're not related to what is required in terms of predicting success in the role. So we spend a lot of time asking these questions. Secondly, questions that don't necessarily tell you anything about the person. So why do you want to work here? What's your worst feature? I love this. So very often we find panel members asking candidates, tell us about your biggest development opportunities. And so very often candidates will answer, well, you know, my attention to detail, or I struggle saying no. So my boundary management, I end up working longer hours. Now, very often line managers would love to hear that. And so candidates can prepare. And so I think a solution to this, back to the slide, would be to go, firstly, how can we filter our candidates better earlier in the process? So you can spend more time in person on the important stuff that really predicts success in the role, maybe your culture, your organization fit, and those human elements such as ideas and my approach to the job. So filter based on your minimum criteria earlier in a way that is more efficient and effective than phoning someone or working through 100 CVs. Secondly, you can use line managers to develop questions or tasks that relate to the actual job. And so what we've seen is that the moment you bring in the line managers to help you build your interview guide, they know exactly what is required in the role. The conversation is less unstructured and follows a more competency-based interview process, where line managers are telling you what to ask and you are building questions around that. Now, I know many of you are doing that already. Again, if one person in the audience thinks, aha, maybe I must do away from an informal coffee chat, then I'm happy about this section in the presentation. In fact, we've got a client, they recruit for accountants, and they use Wamley with one very difficult tax question that they sent to the shortlist. And so the candidates will respond to this one very difficult functional technical question, and the raters within the organization will listen to those answers and then make a decision, because that is such an important piece of the job. And so irrespective if I meet your criteria around culture match, and if you like me, and if I'm highly charismatic, if I can't answer this one technical tax question, then the organization won't look at me. So pose challenges rather than just ask questions. Try and create scenarios and tasks to complete the interview. To summarize this slide, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to questions, the better the net, your questions, the better the catch. More accuracy in terms of your candidates. Okay, the next section I'd like to focus on is decision making, and I'd like to tell you a story. So isolated decision making we see happen very often. So we can't get everybody in the room. Everybody, subject matter experts who really know what they need. They know what the candidates need to know from a knowledge and a skills perspective, but also what personality will work. And so there's a reason why we involve, especially with big decisions, more than one person. And when you do your interview, you should involve more than just one subject matter expert in the room. And it's got everything to do with the wisdom of crowds. And so the story I want to tell you is about the Scorpion submarine. So in 1968, May 22nd, the US Navy lost one of its submarines and they wanted to find the wreckage. But the intelligence at that time was not able to provide an area that was small enough to effectively search for the submarine. So John Craven, the naval officer, decided to use this idea of the wisdom of crowds. And so he asked a wide group of individuals from a range of diverse backgrounds, mathematicians, salvage experts, to guess the submarine's location. Now hear this, the group's average guess was just 222 yards from the actual location where the Scorpion was eventually found. And so there is power in the wisdom of crowds. And so when we consider decision making, alone, when you try and attempt this alone, you can be kind of right, especially if you've got good intuition, which again is not a great predictor of interviewing. But with more inputs, we become more right. So involving more people is definitely the way to go. So when it gets to the top 3 candidates, you've done a piece of technology, you've maybe used video interview to get to the top 3. Now get the line managers involved in the final interview. It's tough, but it's worthwhile to get their input. You could record the video interviews and share them with everybody. Some software like ours allows multiple people, raters, to watch the different responses and the videos and the comments, the answers from the candidates, and then they can comment and score on them in a shared platform area. And this has led to an increase in the hiring of the most suitable people because of this idea of the wisdom of the crowd. Okay, the last section of the presentation, and then we'll get to the Q&A, is learning from our mistakes. So there are manual solutions and there are technological solutions. And having implemented ours and seen others in a variety of our customers, there are a few extra things that I'd like you this morning to consider whether you decide to try Wamley or not. So firstly, the do's and the don'ts. Make sure the role players and the stakeholders understand the why and the benefits of bringing in technology and re-engineering your recruitment process. Buy-in is super, super important. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. If line managers and stakeholders don't buy in, they will not adopt and utilize the technology. So change management together with that buy-in, super critical. When choosing software or technology, be aware of feature stuffing. Okay, so what do I mean with that? Too many bells and whistles makes a system too complicated and too hard to use. And so people will end up not using it and going back to what they did prior to you implementing the technology. Complex is good, complicated is bad. Because remember, guys, we're dealing with multiple data points, people data. We want that integrated. We want to use it in talent management, and we need systems that allow that. So that's complex, that's fine, but not too complicated from a user perspective. Local supports. Again, we're biased, but local means that changes, updates, and fixes, yes, because things at times do break, are fast and most importantly, relevant to your organization. Context. I cannot emphasize this enough. Context is so, so important when bringing in technology. What is your environment like? Where is your business operating? What are your stakeholders like? And most of the times, a vanilla one-size-fits-all system is going to run into challenges if you don't consider your context and your environment. Implementation needs to happen across the entire business, not just in individual silos, because a lack of cohesion will break everything. And then lastly, you need to gather feedback. So chat to your team members, chat to stakeholders involved about their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences in using the technology, because their buy-in and their support ultimately will be critical in your ability to roll out the solution and to share it. Remember, whether it's manual or digital, all processes are systems. And so again, change management, getting feedback, creating that buy-in is absolutely critical, or people will not adopt it. Okay, so that's how we see the new way of recruiting in a world that gives us all these tools we need to do in a faster and more efficient way. So to hire better people faster, which is great for everybody, as a close, I'd like to share with you 8 ways to recruit like a rocketeer in 2021 and beyond. Firstly, people equals power. Recruiting is the gas station where we get the fuel, people, for the business engine. So give it the attention it deserves and make sure the rest of the business understands that very often, too often, recruitment is seen as this mundane admin exercise that doesn't always get the attention and the budget it needs. But hopefully in the last 42 minutes, I've made the case around why this is so important. Secondly, maybe try and consider to lose the legacy. So look at all your processes and see what is traditional but still useful and what is legacy and completely outdated, because you'll be surprised. And then I think chuck or fix the broken stuff. There is a solution out there for all of it. I want you to think about evolving every aspect of your business that you can control and see how much easier your life will be. Next, CVs are probably dead. We made a case for this earlier. At best, use them as filters. I think look at those minimum criteria, decide how you control that part of the process. Only ask for the information that you need to make a decision and not allow people to send you a 20-pager that a poor HR recruitment officer needs to work through every single day. In person, in my mind, especially early in the process, can be unnecessary. The world has changed. And there are faster, more efficient ways to get the same job done better. So maybe think about adopting technology early in your process and then have the high touch later in the process if you think of your funnel. Challenging questions rather than just straightforward questions. So try and see rather how people think, how people work, not just how they respond to a lackluster question. So take the time to develop these, involve your line managers when building your interview guide, have a conversation. Too often interviews end up being the session where the candidate is really under pressure and it feels like everybody's just trying to catch me out. I believe it should be a very good conversation because ultimately from there, this person becomes one of you. And so everybody needs to be able to feel comfortable in that conversation to get the most from the employee and the employer's perspective. Get the role players to play a role. So use the insights of the business. Think of the wisdom of crowds I mentioned earlier to help you do your job better. Change is hard. Do it right. I know change management is difficult, but make sure whatever you do, you update your practices so that the business buys in. And so very often we get a system, we dump it in the organization, there is insufficient communication. And ladies and gentlemen, we all know change management goes hand in hand with transparent, honest, open conversation channels, both from top down and bottom up. So make sure those channels are open. And then lastly, check your own technology needs. Not every solution is right for everybody. So context, context, context. There is a better world just over the horizon. I have seen it. You can too. If there's any way we at Wamley can help, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you so much for listening. And we have a good 15 minutes for a great Q&A session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francois. I think that was a very good presentation, really covering all aspects of the recruitment process and where organizations are or should be thinking when it comes to video recruitment. We do have a number of questions, and I'm glad we have a lot of time to get into them because we have some very interesting ones. There was one which was just a comment and relating to your first poll when you said, how long does it take to fill a position? Ashley Rhymes said, it might be better to put that into days instead of hours. So I've gone ahead and done that. Just as we get the conversation going, just so that we see if there's going to maybe be a difference in the poll results when we change that. So attendees, please go ahead and fill in that poll. As I go on to the next question, which comes from, I think it's Nonkululo Makungo, and she asks, how does Wamley work for executive search, whereby you're dealing with a C-suite candidate who may prefer one-on-one interaction?
Yeah. Sangula, before I start answering, just from an admin perspective, do I at this point keep my slides shared?
Yeah, you can stop sharing. You can stop sharing and let it just be 2 of us. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that question. How does it work for executive search? Again, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, you need to consider your process. You need to consider where are you applying high tech and where are you applying high touch. So where's the bulk sitting? It's definitely not on the exec level. You don't have high churn on an executive level. And so utilizing technology on an executive level would probably be not the preference, but rather a face-to-face or a high-touch engagement. However, what we've seen with some of the Wamley clients on the more senior to executive roles is that what they do is they create a business simulation or a really complex problem, and they give the candidates time to prepare. So think of a simulation exercise, and instead of then setting up a Zoom call to hear how the executive thinks, the executive uses the Wamley platform to answer that very difficult, very complex executive level business problem. But that's definitely not the conversation, the day-to-day kind of questions you would ask executive, but rather utilizing Wamley in that instance. Okay, amazing. Sangula, I see the poll, 30 to 40 days and even more, exactly what Deloitte said.
Yeah, so I mean, it does show that, it still skews towards a longer period, and there's more people doing it within a month, but still 30 or more days seems to be the overall overwhelming choice for recruiters, which goes to show that, it is seems to be quite a cumbersome endeavor to find the right people for your organization. So thank you for that comment, Ashley Rhymes. I'm going to come to another comment that you've made, Ashley, where you've spoken about it's perhaps important to point out the difference between finding the right candidate, or finding the wrong candidate rather, and finding the right candidate who has a negative customer experience, right? So you might hire the right person, but because they don't have a positive experience, do not stay in the organization. Whereas also you might find the wrong candidate because of that they don't stay in the organization for a long time. So how does that speak to the recruitment process in your opinion there, Francois?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think to answer the question, we need to go back to your selection model. So throughout the entire recruitment cycle, there should be selection criteria that you could or could not, well, typically you could allocate a weighting to that would help you predict job success. And so the problem with the recruiting in isolation and not having an integrated talent and recruitment management approach in the organization is the recruitment team can do a brilliant job at getting the right person. And then once they onboarded and into the organization, the EVP that was promised upfront doesn't necessarily get delivered on. I don't believe that is a flaw in the recruitment process, but rather once onboarded. So what is the culture like? What is the performance management like? What are development opportunities provided to individuals once in the organization? So from my side, Sangula, I think firstly, and the delegate who asked us, carefully think about your selection criteria. Ultimately, employees are there to perform in the job. If I could run another poll, I'd ask this. If you could decide on someone who fits your culture perfectly and they've got a great experience, but they're not performing in their job, would you keep them? So that's just an open-ended question. I think we need to consider why are people there? Absolutely, I'm a big custodian and motivator for an awesome culture, great experience, great EVP, amazing development opportunities. But the number one reason I'm in a job is to perform in my job. And so the recruitment process should focus on what will predict success in the role.
That's an interesting point, and I'd like to attendees to just drop it in the chat. If you find the perfect fit or poor performance, would you prefer that to someone who's not the great fit but does perform? I'm really interested to hear what our attendees think, because I know a lot of people will lean towards, if somebody is a perfect fit but is not performing, maybe you can find the reason for that non-performance and address it. Whereas someone is a bad culture fit and is performing, it's pointing towards an employee who's not going to last in the organization long term. So let us know what you think about that. And then our next question is, where are my questions? All right. What about the question around, oh no, I seem to have missed my questions here.
While you're looking for that, don't be stressed. Let me just double click on what you just said. I do believe that there are certain skills and knowledge that can be developed. Obviously, that's why we have PDPs. We have got LMS systems, training interventions that allow candidates to develop. More often than not, they are more behavioral. They could be in line with the requirements of the current, or if you're thinking succession planning, the next role. But some of the skills are inherent. And so, one, if I've got a proper recruitment cycle, that would knock me out early in the process. And then some skills you could try and develop, but then there should be a period. People can't be on development forever, because we see too very often static personal development plans and PDPs and IDPs in organizations. And we have a shotgun approach to development. People, just get sent on EQ or whatever courses. It's not based in line with the requirements of the role. And so, yeah, this is an integrated talent management conversation that we probably don't have enough time for.
Yeah, I have part of my questions now. Yes, I did.
Cool.
Grant Bruce has asked, that while technology is definitely revolutionizing talent acquisition, technology without the right organizational culture will not deliver the desired results. And he asked whether you agree with that, Francois?
Yeah. I think, Grant, to answer your question, there is what the market and the industry is doing, what competitors are doing, what competitor companies in relation to your own company is doing. And you need to make the decision from an organization perspective. Do you, like my Kodak slide in the very beginning, do you want to become irrelevant because you don't want to or cannot want to, or whatever the reason is why you're not adopting the technology? Because ultimately it's gonna boil down to that. I mean, let's imagine for a second someone last year said they're not adopting Teams or Zoom. They will be completely irrelevant on the 5th of May, 2021. So I agree with you. You need a specific culture, but that culture, I very often get this question, what is culture? Culture is nothing else than the behavior of leaders. That's a company's culture. How do the leaders in the organization behave? What are the principles, the values, the standards that they stand for? And how do we entrench that in the organization? So absolutely, the organization needs to adopt, if it doesn't have that, build the culture to integrate technology into systems such as recruitment. If you run into an organization who is not willing to do that, not adopt the technology, you're going to become irrelevant. I hope I answered the question.
I think so. I think you did there. We have one from Roland Claus, who is the CEO of Talent Smith. He's asking, he's making a comment that, whenever you are adopting new technologies, the most important part is to understand the candidate and hiring manager experience, and says that it's tough to change the talent acquisition technology without having insights and data around the way you're currently doing it. Do you agree with his point of view?
Well, absolutely. Ultimately, your employees will be consumers as well. So candidates, especially millennials, are on demand. They demand good service. They demand a good experience. They get irritated and frustrated with outdated, long-winded processes. So when adopting technology, the candidate experience is so important. And if I can share what we do at Wamley is at the end of every single video that a candidate completes, we have a satisfaction survey where we gather that feedback from the candidates so that we can continuously optimize the candidate's journey, give them a better experience, because we know if the candidates are happy, that will indirectly affect your brand. It will affect your EVP. It will say something, even if the candidate is not successful, it will leave the candidate with an amazing experience. And the next time they're at a braai and someone goes, have you seen this organization's way they recruit? They will have a positive indirect effect on your brand. So I cannot agree more with that statement. That's candidate side. User as important. Very often the front end is beautiful, but the back end is so difficult and it's spaghetti and it's sticky and we're logging in 10 places and we can't use the data. So important, Singula and audience, both ends, that the experience needs to be seamless. I read an article the other day that if you download an app from the App Store and you're not able to intuitively use it within 3 minutes, you will delete the app. That's the nature of the world we're living in now.
All right, and then I think the last one, which again comes from Grant, is organizations often lose the best talent due to over-engineering the recruitment process, which are then protected by further delays and rescheduling of steps. Do you agree with that? That maybe we're overthinking this whole recruitment process and re-engineering of recruitment?
Yeah, Grant, I mean, you would remember in the conversation I had this morning, I proposed to drop some of the sections. Like, why would you run 3 to 4 to 5 interviews where the first 3 or 4 questions in every single one of those interviews are similar? Tell us about yourself. If you don't, in interview number 3 already, who know Francois is, then, you're doing. So absolutely, I agree with you. We are over-engineering the process. What are we trying to do? And Sylvia, my dear friend, it's nice seeing you here as well. We are trying to match the individual against the requirements of the role and see if they fit in the organization. Okay. And you can do that, Grant, without having 7 steps in your process. If you can automate the attraction piece, if you can screen out what you need to screen out and then select in using something like a video software like Wamley, where you are able to ask functional, technical, competency, and CV related questions all in one interview guide that takes 15 minutes to do, and it takes the line manager 3 or 4 minutes to screen, then I believe we can absolutely optimize the process. We know that candidates who wait for months to hear back in a recruitment cycle will drop out. They will take a job somewhere else, especially in some of the highly specialized roles like the software guys, the developers, the IT guys. They are so in demand. They can't wait for you to run a 3 to 4 month or 52 days process.
Okay. And I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much, Francois, and everybody who has attended today. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. I'd like to point you to the next event, which we'll be hosting very soon, I think on the 19th of May, where we're going to be discussing the performance management reboot with our tandem, where we'll really be discussing how to unlock your performance management by having meaningful and tough conversations. So please be sure to join us on the 19th of May. Besides that, thank you very much again from Francois and to all of you for attending us today.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It was absolutely fantastic meeting all of you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing, having a great conversation. I saw some familiar names and faces. I hope to connect with all of you soon. And thank you, CHRO, for the opportunity again.
Fantastic. Cheers and enjoy your week and afternoon further.
Cheers, guys.
And